Lou, I have to hand it to you. You didn't think this would be one of those upset specials, and, well, you were right. And honestly, I thought while watching Notre Dame's 45-3 humiliation of Pitt unfold, when the score was 14-3, just watching Pitt's offensive futility and the Notre Dame defense fly around out there, that to me felt like a pretty insurmountable lead. So, yeah, you called it.
I don't know if I called it, and blind squirrels can call a few things too with acorns and everything, but I wasn't expecting 45-3, I'll say that. But it's just one of those days. We talked about it after Louisville. You're going to have days like that, and you're going to have days like this where you say, why can't they just bottle that every single Saturday? And that's just not how college football works, even though Clemson and Alabama make it look easy that way. It's 99.9% of teams don't experience something like that. But about 3 times a year, you're going to have one of those games where you say, why can't they play like that all the time? And about a couple times a year, you're also going to have those games like, what the heck happened? And back-to-back, you saw that with Louisville and Pitt. It doesn't mean that Notre Dame's not a top 10 team when they didn't perform as well against Louisville, and it doesn't mean Notre Dame's a national championship team now after Pitt. Somewhere in between, reality is there, and we'll find out.
Well, it's definitely something that you wanted to see with that big November 7th game, now just less than 2 weeks away. And again, even if for whatever reason things didn't move the needle for you with whatever you saw out there, it's a lot better than the alternative of another sluggish game. And we really got a glimpse of, Lou, you kind of hinted at it a little bit in the pregame pod that we did, but a glimpse of what Notre Dame's mindset and process was, that they weren't going to get caught off guard by this, that game against Louisville the week before, the ugly-looking 12-7 win, was indeed a spark. And we got to look at it and a peek into it when Brian Kelly pulled a reverse coach speak, really, and basically told us, yeah, we were looking ahead. What we had done wasn't good enough. So we're going to play that soundbite for you for a minute, just because I thought it stood out that much, in what a departure from just what he'd said the week before, and just a departure from what you usually get if you ask coaches about big games that are upcoming. But first, I want to make sure you are subscribed to the podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up button or subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter. Follow me, Patrick Engel, at @PatrickEngel_. And you can follow Lou at BGI_Lou Somogyi. If you like the podcast, please leave us 5 stars, nice comments. Tell a friend about it. So here's Brian Kelly on his team's mindset and the challenge, really, he issued to his team this week.
What's important now is also about what's important next. And so there's this understanding with this group now that everything they do now has bearings on who we are as a football team later in the season. And we needed to elevate our compete level. And they certainly did that today. And just playing to win games is not good enough anymore. We need to elevate our compete level. We need to coach better. We need to play better. We need to play at an elite level. And it starts with playing, at a level that allows you to not all of a sudden play your best when you have to, but have that ready to go because you are playing at a high level, and that hasn't been the case. So that was the challenge, and that's, it's risky, right? Because you're in some instances, people would say, well, you're looking ahead. Well, we are looking ahead a little bit. We needed to get this football team to understand that they are really good.
Lou, you've been in many a Brian Kelly press conferences and covered all 11 years of them. How striking to you was that admission of, yeah, we know we got to play better and we know what's coming up on the schedule?
I don't think this relates just to Brian Kelly. This is a coaching code throughout the fraternity about never acknowledging anything beyond what is ahead of you at that point, that Saturday, that opponent. I don't think there was any disrespect meant towards Pitt or towards Georgia Tech now, too. It's more about a standard that Notre Dame is aspiring to as far as they want to be at a championship level. And to get there, whether you're playing Pitt or South Florida or Georgia Tech or Clemson, there's a certain standard that you have to achieve on the field. And they use that as a motivating element, that if we want to get there, it doesn't matter. It can be opponent X. You're playing against yourself. You're playing against a standard and a bar that you have set. So I think maybe we made more of it than what it is. It's only surprising because it's not the politically correct thing necessarily to say for a coach in a conference. But I think deep down, especially those who are in the top 10 or so, that's how they feel every week.
I love that he leaned right into it. And like you said, I don't think it really mattered who the opponent was. It was a thing of whatever happened in the first 4 games just wasn't good enough. He knew it. The team knew it. And it's almost like Kelly heard, you guys shouting through Twitter or on the message board, just kind of clamoring of what's going on here. This doesn't look right, or they're not going to have a chance, or this isn't a top 3 team or whatever. But I just kind of like that he embraced it and went there and told the team exactly that. Of when we heard him talk about urgency all week, this was absolutely a kind of closer look and in more, I guess, specific way that of outlining that sense of urgency. We hear that tossed around a lot, but him kind of going to this length was, at least a way that, he probably tells a team stuff like this all the time, or coaches do in general, but we don't necessarily hear it. So
right.
I just like that he went right for it. And like you said, it didn't matter who was on the schedule on that day. It was, we have to play better for us to get to the goals that we want to do. We have to play better starting sooner because we know what's coming up in 2 weeks. And Pitt just happened to be the opponent. And yeah, I think he was right in that, what you'd seen in the first 4 games hadn't really been enough to make you feel real good about going out there and being able to hang with Clemson and much less beat them.
What a coach says to the media and what a coach says to his team behind closed doors are 2 different elements. We've learned that through the years. And I just don't think it was that big a deal. It just was a surprise in that his MO always had been, well, we treat every game the same. And I've never really believed that. You can't. It's just like when a coach sometimes says that I treat every player the same. You really can't. There's some who are better at accepting criticism. You need to light a fire under some, and you need to pat backs of others for positive reinforcement. It's not one size fits all, and it's also not one opponent fits all. It's different every week.
What struck me just as much, and I briefly hinted at it earlier, but I want to dive into it a little bit more, was just how different this was from the post-game message a week ago. I mean, that whole winning is hard message after Louisville, to me, was kind of maybe a little defiant, defensive of like, hey, we're 4-0. We believe we're fine. We just won a game and allowed a single touchdown. So a little bit as if he's almost kind of not that interested in leaning into we have to be better. And then he goes around and turns around and comes right out and says it. And Ian Book, kind of the same thing. I mean, he last week went right back to the winning is hard. Coach always tells us that, et cetera, et cetera. And then we heard Bennett Skoranek kind of give us a glimpse of Book after that game, saying, yeah, they were hanging out after the game, and you see Book was mad. He was mad about how he played and how their passing offense is gone. So
look, there's a script that coaches and players always have to follow, and it's like there's a saying that you are loved the most when you deserve it the least. So when they're down, like after a Louisville game, which they didn't perform well, you try to build them back up. And then when you play tremendously, then you try to, say we can do much more, and you take them down a little bit. So that's in the coaching handbook 101. And with players too. There's a way you deal with things in the media, and then there's a way you deal with things behind closed doors in your own locker room.
It was really funny how I caught a glimpse in a few tweets of Dabo Swinney's post-game press conference after Syracuse beat Pitt by, I don't remember, Clemson beat Syracuse, I should say, by 3 touchdowns or something like that. It was a closer game than that score would indicate for a little bit, but Dabo's getting questions about how can you let Syracuse stay in there for a half, and he says, like, am I in the right press conference? Almost as if kind of the same message of Kelly as last week, saying, hey, winning's hard. We just won, and we just won by 3 touchdowns. It's just kind of a funny dichotomy of obviously where those 2 teams are at, but also where they're at kind of 2 weeks out from playing each other. And I know it's tiresome, and I try not to make everything all about this a 1-game referendum, but you kind of can't help but think that way a little bit, or at least really think more seriously and not get tired of what does this mean for Clemson after what we just heard Kelly say and Bennett Skoranek say and Kurt Hinish say when we all asked them about kind of the same theme that Kelly had touched on. I think like I said, what you had to see. I know it wasn't perfect, but at some point you needed to see big chunk plays in the passing game. I know they didn't run the ball particularly efficiently at 2.5 yards a pop, but they got yards when it mattered. You still see Kyron Williams power through defenders and tackles. I mean, on both the 3rd and 1 runs he picked up, he was hit before the line to gain and still made it. And on defense, like, I don't know what more you can ask for. I don't know if you know this, Lou, but you only can play the teams on your schedule. And you can't make Pitt's offense really good if you were thinking of, before Clemson, I want to see them shut down a really good offense. This was what was there. It wasn't very good. Pitt's offense just isn't very good, and they made it look even worse. So as far as what's happening heading into that game, exactly what you wanted to see. And sure, this was its toughest test in the sense that it was a road game. Pitt at least has a good defense. They get up for Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just kind of shoved them aside.
And going back to coaching statements after the games, Pat Narduzzi talked about this was as good a team as we have played in the last 6 years. Well, you're going to probably say something like that after losing by 6 touchdowns on your home field. But, a couple years ago, in December of 2018, before Notre Dame and Clemson played in the college football playoff, Pat Narduzzi said there is no comparison between the 2 teams. I believe Clemson was a 15 or 16-point favorite at the time, and even then, I think Pat Narduzzi didn't think that was enough. He just said flat out, there's no comparison. Notre Dame can not play with Clemson. Clemson's the far better team, and Clemson went on to win 30-3. After this game, it makes it sound like he gives Notre Dame a shot. When you're saying that this is as good a team as you've played in the 6 years that you've been there, which includes a couple of national champions in Clemson in 2016 and 2018. And by the way, the 2016 Clemson team that's only lost was to Narduzzi's Pitt team at home, and that's the last time they lost at home. So that's at least it gives something as far as, hey, here's somebody who's been through it. He's seen Notre Dame. He's Clemson. He's a good football man. He knows his stuff there. And to have that type of about face 2 years later, as far as where he sees the two programs, at least that's somewhat uplifting. Now, you keep in perspective that the 5 teams that Notre Dame has defeated are a combined 9-22. And, it's like the old Charlie Brown and Lucy. Oh, this is the year, Charlie Brown, you get to kick the football. This is the year. And get it pulled away. So it only gets answered really November 7th as far as are you there? And it's not about competing well or coming close or anything like that. You're way, way, way past time to win one of those type of games. And that's why there's that feeling also among Brian Kelly that, look, this isn't about winning anymore. And you're not truly ever the Notre Dame head coach until 9-2, 10-2 starts feeling more like a valley as opposed to a peak.
Yeah, and he really, like I said, leaned into it where, this was Notre Dame's 29th straight win over an unranked team. And he almost kind of acknowledged, like, hey, that's cool and all, but we're not trying to peak there. And again, very different from how you interpreted that streak through his comments last week as opposed to this week. Whereas almost he kind of acknowledged, like, yeah, Notre Dame could go 10-1 or 9-2 or 10-2 or whatever and win a bowl game and whatnot and have a really good year and keep that streak going. But he's still kind of acknowledging, like, yeah, to a degree, it's going to fall on empty ears and echo into empty air if it's, it not, mixed in there with the big win that they've kind of missed. And of course, it's still something to be upset proof. Just ask Penn State how that feels. But yeah, it was an interesting acknowledgement of, like, that streak being great, but still kind of missing something. And again, to hear that from the head coach is, I'm sure, refreshing for a lot of Notre Dame fans. We're going to take a quick timeout, and then we'll dive into the offensive performance a little bit more. So when we talk about what did you have to see before Clemson, I think as much as anything else is it was get downfield passing plays, chunk plays, do something in the passing game with receivers in particular. And you had to like what you saw in that sense out of Bennett Skowronek. 107 yards, 2 catches, both touchdowns. Both times winning a contested one-on-one ball. I think if there were any Northwestern fans watching that game, they certainly saw the same guy who made some big catches for them in his 2 years really as a go-to target there, including a touchdown catch that basically clinched them the West Division in the Big Ten in 2018. So, Lou, when you watch that unfold and just kind of look at what we see, how did you react to that compared to Javon McKinley's 107-yard game against Florida State? Was it kind of the same thing of, oh, this could be a real boost or a breakout or sign of things to come? Or did you look at it as, all right, let's see what happens, but hey, you needed to see something like this?
You needed to see something like it because the 3 previous opponents, as we outlined last week, North Carolina State, Boston College, Miami, all pretty much destroyed Pitt through the air. Pitt's going to stop the run, and they did against Notre Dame too. They came in number 1 in the country against the run, 61.5 yards a game. Notre Dame finished with 115, which is 54 above the average. So 115 looks horrible on paper, but given the opponent. And part of that also is Ian Book's scrambling ability to get 40 yards when the pocket at times began to collapse. And he showed, once again, his underrated escapability skills that kept the chains moving several times, especially on that opening touchdown drive when he scrambled 3 times for 19 yards and picked up a couple of first downs. But they knew going into the game that this was not the type of outing where you pick up 250, 300 yards rushing. They had to hit on some big plays, just like NC State and Boston College and Miami all did against a vulnerable Pitt defense as well. Because when you sell out against the run as much as Pitt does, you're leaving your secondary in vulnerable position. So you have to at least demonstrate that you can beat them. And they did what they had to do. Does this mean that, okay, it's arrived and all's well now? No, it doesn't. Notre Dame did what the other opponents of Pitt did as well. But at least it demonstrated the capability that, okay, we did do what we had to do. Now, can we do it against a better opponent all around?
Yeah, you had to see some type of life there in a situation that would be nice for winning downfield one-on-ones, like you illustrated. And if it was a case where that, that was absent, I think you'd be pretty worried. And then you saw what a healthy Skoranek can theoretically bring with downfield ball skills, winning jump balls, big frame. Just hadn't really had both the opportunities on those types of throws, and certainly hadn't been healthy enough in the first few games. So
and great adjustments on the balls both times. The first one, he was running full speed across the middle. Ball was a little bit behind him, wasn't quite in stride, but to be able to catch it and then continue at the speed that he did. And then the second one, making the leaping grab, timing the high point perfectly over a 5'9" defender, and then still, not falling down when you make the catch and come down, but maintain your balance and go in for the score. I mean, those were beyond just good catches.
Yeah, and the yards after catch were helped a little bit by a gamble on the ball. The first one by Paris forward and a pretty bad angle by the safety coming over and help defense. But not to take anything away from the catches themselves, like you mentioned, I think the second one was particularly impressive with how he's able to go basically box out the corner while still running and catch it at exactly the highest point. And I react and view this a little differently than the McKinley game a few games ago, where just in terms of sustainability or projection ability, for lack of a better term, where Kelly was asked a few times after that Florida State game, and it was almost like he had to, or trying to reassure or boost up or inflate McKinley's belief, and where he's basically said, like, he's a beast and he needs to hear that. I think McKinley was actually in the room in Kelly's Zoom session when he said that. So almost a thing of like, hey, this was the first big game for you like this against a real meaningful defense. You got to believe you can do this. So maybe just a hint of like, all right, this is like, is this really for real? Can this really be a thing? With Skoranek, I think he kind of knows that, yeah, he's good. He's proven. I mean, he was a good receiver for a team that won a Big Ten division. And we heard last week about safety blanket or something that he was referred to as. And I think Kelly, he kind of said, I don't know that he would really like to be that, where it's kind of, you have a thing where, yeah, he's a confident guy who knows his ability. He just had to have a game where it was on display, given the chance to be on display, and certainly healthy enough for him to display it. So I think it's a little more sustainable, or you can expect a few more catches or games in anywhere in this neighborhood than how we were talking about McKinley's emergence or game per se, where it's like, are we sure this isn't an outlier? And Javon had a good game too. I thought the yards after the catch in particular on that, it wasn't a design, I don't think, but just like a check down or dump off last resort under pressure, that 41-yard catch he had where he read some blocks nicely and waited for that to develop. But I think you feel pretty good about what Skoranek can give you going forward, and especially just him having the understanding of, yeah, I belong here. And I want to point out that at least I'll give myself partial credit on my bold prediction. I said somebody have a 100-yard receiving game, and that would be due in part to 2 catches of 20 yards downfield. I got the 100 right. Skoronek's 34-yard touchdown, I think the throw was about 16 yards downfield. So I missed that, and I thought Book would have 4 20-plus yard passes. He had 2. But either way, I'll say partial credit here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my stat of the game was Notre Dame entered the game with only 8 passes that were completed for more than 20 yards through the first 4 games. And 4 of them were caught by wide receivers. This game alone, you had 6. Now, again, most of them were yards after the catch. It's not necessarily throwing the ball more than 20 yards down the field. Certainly the 73-yard touchdown was one, but at least you got the yards after the catch element too. And it came among different guys. Avery Davis had one. Javon McKinley on that 41-yard one, obviously. Skoronek's catches. Michael Mayer, who was just really becoming beyond what we really had expectations-wise, and the expectations were he could be a freshman All-American, and he's, just as a pass receiver, he's become such a weapon that they want to utilize more and more as the season progresses, catching 5 balls, which ties the freshman record at Notre Dame by a tight end. Kyle Rudolph had 5 for 70 against Stanford in 2008, and Mayer had 5 for 73 here. So he's including the touchdown there. In traffic again, that's another part, is that he catches the ball when they're contested as well.
If he's not a freshman All-American at this point, I mean, what are we even doing here?
Well,
I know.
Let's use Eric Gilbert. I mean, he's also going to be in that conversation, but you got to put in 2 tight end system for that All-American
yes.
team this year.
Yes. I mean, we'll see what exactly unfolds, especially if there's some freshman tight end in the Big Ten or the Pac-12 or whatever that emerges. But Mayer's going to have the numbers here. And if you're still a little worried about the receivers as a whole, and I think there's certainly good reason to still think, on the whole, I'm not sure this group is still that great, especially with Kevin Austin now out for the year, especially with Braden Lenzy seemingly coming up hurt with another hamstring issue late in the game there. And you don't really feel great about what that's going to portend going forward. But you have one answer or solution in your passing game, and that's more Michael Mayer. I mean, I think this is the kind of game that you have to see from him, or you want to see from him, or try to feed him as far as target volume every game going forward. I think it's pretty clear he's their best or most talented receiver, and that's including catching passes, catch radius, run after the catch, just mismatch problem. And the more you throw to him, just good things happen. And we've talked about this a lot. You want to create mismatches. That's the guy who can do it as well as anybody. And I think Notre Dame's starting to figure that out as, like, if whatever our pass offense ceiling is, it involves a lot of this guy.
Yeah, when I watch him out there, and he looks so advanced. He looks like he could walk into an NFL camp right now and not be out of place. But what I really think about it, and it makes me shudder, is how the heck could he be stopped in high school? I'm envisioning those high school safeties. I'm envisioning him on high school fields last year, and I'm saying, God help those poor guys in the defensive backfield or whatever who, after a catch, had to face him. That required a lot of courage.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in those defensive meetings and defensive pregame with those high school defensive coordinators and players just kind of dreading what they have to do out there with slowing this guy down that not even college defenses have been able to take away or easily bring down. Or, like, if you try to tackle him arm tackles in high school, I mean, good luck. It just wasn't going to work. And one last thing on the tight ends here. I think it's still, at least, if this isn't the case, it's not clear, but I think it still is the case that Tommy Tremble is among their 4 best receivers. And this was his 3rd game with 1 catch. Over that span, I believe he has 7 targets, and that's if you include the pass interference penalty he drew on that trick play. I think you want to see a little bit more there. They haven't really gotten him going downfield. I think we've seen in the past that he's a good downfield threat. We know he can run. And just with wanting as much receiver help as you can really get, especially against, the tough November schedule and that good defense is coming up here in a couple of weeks, you want to find those mismatches. You want to find your potential game breakers. And I would imagine, just like I said, whatever the ceiling of Notre Dame's passing offenses involves a lot of Mayer, I think it involves a little bit more Tremble too.
Yeah. It seems like his identity has become more caught up in his effectiveness as a blocker. And now you just want to balance that out a little bit more where he can be a bona fide receiving threat again.
And there's plenty of opportunity there just with how much Notre Dame plays in multi-tight end sets. And even with Mayer getting more targets, there's not necessarily meaning that he's excluded of it because they're on the field so much out there together. So before we wrap up, Lou, let's talk about the defense. I think the biggest thing that you wanted to see and that we did see was turnovers. And granted, Pitt was just chucking the ball all over the place without really much of a care in the world. I mean, some of these throwaways and third down passes short of the sticks and just nonchalant, toss it up was the whole thing was not a good look for where this thing is under Pat Narduzzi. It was just uninspired by halftime. But nonetheless, you wanted to see some more interceptions and turnovers. You got those. I'm running out of things to say about how impressive, important, and every down versatility asset that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is on a slot receiver there, running the route right with him and turning around and picking that thing off. But got to like the turnovers there. I think you like the increase in pressure that Isaiah Foskey brought. So we saw Foskey get more involved, as Brian Kelly hinted that he wanted to do. And we saw some turnovers. Again, 2 things that in the whole thing of what does it mean for Clemson, as tiresome as that is, again, that you wanted to see an ability to take away the ball.
And again, the rotation along the defensive line, you see a Justin Adamalola. I think Isaiah Foskey had over 30 snaps in this game, if I'm correct, and all. And, it was good to see Myron Tungavaloa-Amosa get a sack there too, where he just powered his way through the line. And it really is a plug and play along that defensive line. Kurt Heinisch back in his hometown making, some really good plays along the way. The thing that just it struck you early on, especially after the second touchdown catch by Skoranek, is that Pitt just cannot run the ball. It was very similar to me, like last year's Notre Dame-Georgia game, where Notre Dame just said, waving the white flag, we can't run the ball. We got to just rely on the pass. And I just sensed it was over then, because you're not going to be effective at all against this Notre Dame defense with just one dimension. And they pretty much conceded. They had 2 yards rushing at halftime, and a couple of them were on sacks and all, but they knew that they couldn't do anything. And you add that in with a quarterback who's starting his only second career game, and at least Kenny Pickett, who was injured, the starter, he could have at least provided a run threat element, whether it was with quarterback draws or a little zone read. You did not have that at all. So Notre Dame was just able to pinch everything toward just stopping that passing attack. And I thought, fantastic job on one of the great freshmen in the country, Jordan Addison. I thought the corners did very well on him, but you also had a lot of support and help from Kyle Hamilton, and that's not a bad guy to have as a contingency option to in double coverage there, and he was their top weapon. And other than that perfect 33-yard pass there on the fade early on, he was limited to 2 catches for 7 yards. So Notre Dame knew what was coming too. Pitt had no choice but just to throw the ball around, and that played right into Notre Dame's hands.
Clark Lee's plan on Jordan Edison was very much we'll take your best player and counter him with ours. I mean, he saw 7 targets, I believe, if you include the pass interference penalty. Hamilton was the primary defender on 4 of those. And yeah, the only success for Edison was the pass interference. And there were others where Hamilton was with Clarence Lewis double teaming him, and there wasn't a ball thrown to him because it just wasn't a good idea. There was no opening there. And like Tutu Atwell a week before, Addison's a dangerous yards after catch threat. Sean Crawford got him down twice right after his 2 short completions. So a really good job on just taking away what Pitt does best on offense, or really, like, let's be real, the only thing it does well on offense. The Georgia comparison, like you said, was a really good way to describe what they did. They ran it once on the first drive, nothing. Twice on the second drive, they produced 0 yards. And then their third drive, all passes. Just waving the white flag, which really that game was waving the white flag at halftime when Pitt came out there with a minute and a half left and 3 timeouts and said, forget about it. We're not even trying to score. So just admit it. Couldn't do anything against a Notre Dame defense that we seem to feel is kind of ascending or even peaking at exactly when you want to see it peaking.
Yeah. And let's add special teams in there too. Great call by Brian Kelly to call that final timeout with 11 seconds left there to get Isaiah Foskey. And Foskey is just one of those players that he has that knack for showing up when it's most needed. He just makes those plays, and he makes it look so easy too. So second time he's blocked a punt. Did that against Stanford last year to completely turn that game around when Notre Dame was trailing 17-7. South Florida tried a fake punt as well, smelled it out from the outset, made a stop there. He's been as good in punt coverage as anybody over the last 6 games.
Special teamer. Yeah, I mean, if All-American special teamer, right in ballot. There you go. Just get the campaign going now.
Pro Bowl has that.
Yeah, that's right.
College football should have that too.
Yeah, All-American special teams player. I can't say I pay attention to other teams' special teams too much, but yeah, you'd have to imagine that he could be a front runner for such a position. That'll do it for this edition of the Irish Huddle. Notre Dame going into Georgia Tech next week. I believe the opening line, Lou, was 19.5 or somewhere around there.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
I would imagine that might rise. I mean, just me hearing that right away, I would think, yeah, I would pick them to win by 3 touchdowns. Georgia Tech got handled pretty good by Boston College and old friend Phil Dracovic. I think you saw a little bit of a pulse from them, but still reminded that, yeah, this is still not a great team and has a bit of a road upward. That's a 3:30 Eastern kick Saturday, ABC, same time as this past week. We'll talk to you again on Thursday, preview that game. Until then, take care.